We've done like 50 episodes and I don't know how to control the microphone either. There have been times where I'm editing and I'm like, I'm not speaking into the mic at all.
Awesome.
I'm like, that one's great, and like it doesn't work. Okay, I have a question. I have a question I've been meaning to ask you to just kick things off.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself like more of a drunken war criminal or like a guy who like writes poetry? Are you more of like a Nathan Algren or a Katsumoto? I mean, be honest. Which one? Come on.
I think probably the drunken war criminal is the most accurate. Because I also like to think that I write something, but it's all just like, the ocean is empty and I feel good.
Every time you write a haiku, you're like 565, 575. Welcome to the Low Ceiling. I'm John.
I'm Chris.
Across from me is this guy.
Chris. Yeah. Hi. I'm not Pri.
I always interrupt Pri when she says her name too, so it's perfect that
So
I interrupted
maybe
you.
I am Pri.
Maybe you are. Actually,
I've been Pri all
Pri
along.
is away, and she was like, "Oh, I'm too lazy to do a bunch in a row. I don't want to do Fantastic Beasts 5, 6, and 7." And I was like, "You're a loser. We don't need you. I have friends who are accomplished at things." Chris
That lapsed into kind of a Trumpian monologue there.
Yeah.
I have
many of the best friends.
They're the best friends.
For
ever.
example, Chris, one
That's
of the
me.
greatest Americans. Chris, a writer director.
Hello.
Of a short film maker.
Yes.
Of a guy.
That's me.
Norwegian.
Yeah.
Friend.
Yeah.
All of those things. Yeah.
Vänner.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think so. That's what I've always said.
Yeah, exactly.
And today we're talking about The Last Samurai.
Shing.
An Edward Zwick 2003 film that is way better than people give it credit for.
It actually really
Dude,
is.
I like this movie a lot.
It's great.
I'm a really big fan of it.
I watched it 3 times in the last week just for prep for this,
yeah.
and I feel really good about that decision.
Hell yeah, I got it. I have it on my
on physical media.
library physical media DVD for all the kids out there. Yeah, on a digital video disc. I watched the commentary with Edward Zwick.
Oh, I bet that was cool.
It was okay. It was like, it's funny when you listen to some directors. So one of the things I think we've lost in the streaming era is like director and writer and actor commentary. Like,
Absolutely.
it would be nice if streamers could like if Netflix, when they make a good film, which is rare, if they could like give you a version of it where it's like, why don't you should be able to stream a version with commentary.
Absolutely.
It would be amazing.
I mean, they should just have that. Like, if it's already available because it's on the DVDs, why isn't that just a normal thing you can turn off and on, just like you can change it from, English to the Spanish dub or blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, it should be available.
Also, it's like if it's a Netflix movie, like I would love to hear the commentary for like The Killer, right?
Totally.
And they should do that, but it's something that I think we've missed a lot. And with my spiffy new PS5, I can watch these physical medias and watch the commentaries.
Snap.
But the weird thing is, like, some commentaries I've found especially with directors who wrote the script, or at least partially wrote the script, is like sometimes they'll talk too much about the story, and I'm kind of like, I know, I'm watching the movie. Like, I'm kind of getting it, and it's like the commentary of this is right at the beginning. Edward Zwick is like, I'm watching a print of The Last Samurai. This is about 3 days after it's been released, and I'm just already having flashbacks about all of the compromises that I had to make during
You know what? That's kind of the most real way
Yeah.
someone could approach that. I mean, we've been spoiled for choice because of like our generation growing up with the Lord of the Rings commentary and the special, the making of documentary that those came with. That's kind of like the top of the when right there.
Yeah, for sure. Also, like growing up in the best era for like DVD and special features and stuff, like watching.
Yeah.
But when I used to have like a collection of DVDs and stuff, commentary certainly varied between being like, some of these aren't as good, and then you're like, David Fincher is the best at commentaries as well as the best at making movies,
and just so dry and funny.
I know. Yeah.
I don't remember which movie it was, but it was a different epic, and I remember probably still have the DVD, but I remember there being the like commentary with the director and a few of the leads, and then also the director with a few of the like with the cinematographer and the editor and the special effects supervisor. I don't remember which movie it was, but I remember the second one being way more interesting to me anyway.
Yeah. One of the most surprising ones was like I had like the ultra amazing some version of the Star Wars films, the 6 Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
And like all of the commentaries with George Lucas were like pretty okay. Like they didn't blow me away. The sound guy though was amazing. Listening to he had like, he shared a commentary track with like the designer and someone, so they would but they weren't together, they would just fade in and fade out, and then you would just hear him pop out and be like, I made this sound by smacking a baseball bat against rebar and then stretching it. I was like, that's so fucking sick.
It continues the tradition of Star Wars sound workers being the coolest people on the set. Like the classic photo, I don't know if you've seen it, of like the boom op with the tiny, tiny little hot pink shorts, and that's all he's wearing in the middle of the desert. Like, that's a champion right there, let me tell you.
That's how you know they're you've worked on a set before. That's how you know they're the boom op, is because they have to wear hot pink shorts.
That's how you can tell. That and the boom.
Yeah.
But the shorts really
But the shorts really, like, because nobody's looking up that high, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's looking at the ground, and they're like, oh, you must be the boom operator. You got hot pink shorts.
Well, yes, you cannot look anyone in the eyes on a film set.
Absolutely not.
Very illegal.
No, definitely not. Yeah. Not since Me Too. It really ruined that.
That's what that whole thing was about.
Yeah. And the boom off is like, I still get to wear the pink shorts, though, right?
That's all that matters.
Like, as long as it's tasteful, you can wear the pink shorts.
Good.
How you doing, man? You happy
I'm
to be
doing
here?
all right, man. I'm stoked to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for helping me out.
It is so sick to be on this thing. I've been listening to this pod since the get-go. Very excited.
You are our fan. You are the fan, I would say.
The one fan. Can't wait to listen to my episode.
But the crazy thing is we've been friends much longer than you've been a fan of this show.
That's true. Neat. Well, as far as you know.
As far as that's true, actually, yeah. Might have been faking it this entire time. And I say thank you for helping me out. Actually, really thank you for helping Pri out from her lazy ass, from being like, oh, but what if I'm tired?
You're welcome, Priyanka.
Yeah. She's like, oh, John, what if I'm tired? What if I don't want to be the talent? And I'm like, well, then I'll get someone better, greatest American, etc. So we're good to go.
Actually, speaking of, I did Google and find on YouTube some of the like behind the scenes stuff for this movie.
Horses running into people.
And
big time.
Man, there's so much fascinating shit they did for this. Like,
yeah, dude, tell me about it.
My favorite thing was I love learning where they shoot things, like where movies were shot.
Surprising, right?
Yeah, this was like Burbank, which is not that surprising. New Zealand.
Most of it is in New Zealand, yeah.
And a little bit in Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, there's on the commentary Zwick, there's like moments where he's like, and here's like this set in Burbank. We walk through it, and then we're walking through a part in this shot in New Zealand, and then up these steps we're in Kyoto, and it's
so
like
crazy.
It's like, man, that's how cinema works, I guess. Yeah. But I didn't know for the longest time until like researching this movie that it was shot in New Zealand, but it kind of makes sense now. But I was like, that's totally. There's also this movie's from 2003, and there's like tons of really good digital effects in it.
Really
and I was like,
good.
I guess I could have guessed if pressed, but like there's like a scene with him on a boat, and he's like sailing in front of, like, before he looks and there's the mountain and stuff, and all of that is digital. Just everything behind him is a blue screen, and then in front of him they get this shot of the mountain, which I'm like, now that you say it seems obvious because it's too perfect of a shot, but it was like, I was like, but it looks fucking really real.
It looks great.
Yeah.
Like, this movie has aged so beautifully.
Yeah.
And like, it was shot, I did Google this, it was shot on Kodak stock anamorphic lenses, meaning it has like that beautiful, like, organic feel of old cinema, but with all this beautiful new technology before we started shooting everything in front of green screens.
Yeah.
It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's cool, man. Also, John Toll is the cinematographer, and he's like legendary. But
I mean, Braveheart. Like, what else do you have to say, right?
So one thing like that amazes me about this movie is I really like it, but I acknowledge that it's not amazing, but it's actually quite good. And it's kind of like the B grade of a lot of, but it has so many good people working on it. So there's lots of knocks about this movie being like Dances with Wolves or Avatar or Pocahontas.
Yeah.
It's like a white savior movie and blah, blah, blah.
It's a little hard to say, no, it's not.
Yeah.
To some of that stuff.
But whenever I watch this movie, and this shouldn't come as a surprise, I always think of Gladiator, which is one of my favorite movies.
No, and they came out around similar, like they're from the same era.
And they're written by the same guy.
Really?
John Logan, yes.
Oh man, I totally missed that. That makes so much sense.
John Logan continues his tradition of like, he's like a writer who I only really notice every once in a while, who I'm like, yeah, but he's written like 4 films that I really love.
Yeah.
And all of them have some involvement of like a man who can't truly love.
Yep.
Like, or can't love in the proper way.
Yeah.
Gladiator, he's stuck in a cage. Last Samurai, he killed the woman's husband.
Well,
the Aviator, he's the aviator.
Right.
And then he also wrote Alien Covenant, another favorite of this show, where the guy can't love because he's an android. So it is like,
yeah, that's true.
It's kind of a theme he comes back to. He's a great writer.
I want to touch on the white savior narrative. I do think that's not an invalid criticism, but I also feel that more than Tom Cruise showing up and saving the day, which he, spoiler alert, doesn't do, he's the one who's saved.
Oh, yeah.
By Katsumoto.
Yeah.
Ken Watanabe's awesome performance as that character is like the real bedrock of the movie. And I found this great quote from Watanabe in this 2002 interview with The Guardian, where he said, in his opinion, after The Last Samurai came out, it was a turning point in Hollywood for Asian representation.
Yeah, I read that same one, yeah.
And, I mean, I'm not like an Asian representation historian, but that's really cool that he feels that way.
He feels very positively about the effect this had on his career. That was also the same, I believe the same Guardian interview where they talked about how the fact that he's had like multiple crazy health problems in his life. Did you read that bit?
I only found that quote. I didn't realize. I didn't know he'd had crazy health issues.
He was a working actor in Japan.
Yeah.
And at 29 he got leukemia.
Fuck.
In the early 90s.
What?
And he had to quit like acting and stuff. It took him a long time to recover, and then during the filming of this, he found out he got Hep C from a procedure, like a treatment during his time with leukemia.
Right.
And so he was having health problems here.
Jesus Christ.
And then later, like in after Inception, which also kind of raised his profile a lot, he also he had another like insane like health problem. He's had such a wild time of it, you know, and
I
he's
had no
been
idea.
such a successful actor. He's a great actor, and he was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for this movie.
And honestly, he deserved it.
He deserved it. He's so good in this film.
Absolutely
and
fantastic.
I have to say, going back to The White Savior, Tom Cruise does not have to be that good in this movie, and I think he's pretty fucking great.
I'm gonna go ahead and say it might be like it might be his best performance.
I think it's one of his most underrated for sure. But like the white savior part of it, I agree. Like I acknowledge that those criticisms are pretty valid, but I don't think it's as cut and dry as people might make it out to be, nor as simple as like the movie comes across at first blush. Like if you told someone what it was about, they would probably be like, that's just Dances with Wolves or Avatar or whatever. And it's imperfect in that regard. But at the same time, as you said, like he's the one who gets saved.
Yeah.
It's sort of in a negative light, you could be like, it's at the expense of like Japanese culture. But I think listening to Zwick talk about it and listening to Watanabe talk about it, it's like they did a really good job of like honoring the culture of Japan to bring it into light in a major Hollywood movie with the biggest star on earth.
Yeah.
People get a little turned off by the fact that it's like called The Last Samurai and it has Tom Cruise on the cover. But as we have talked about this before, but as I think I've said before, if you have Tom Cruise in your film, why you would not put them on the poster?
Absolutely.
Tom Cruise is the biggest name.
But then that's also like, if you look at the Japanese promotional posters and the Japanese DVD cover, it isn't that iconic shot of Tom Cruise on the horse. It's the 4 main characters.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense though, right?
What are they? I have it written down, of course. It's Nathan Algren by Tom Cruise, Katsumoto, played by Ken Watanabe, Ujio, played by Hiroyuki Sanada, who is another incredible actor.
Zwick called him the Tom Cruise of Japan.
Accurate.
He's a really big deal there.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
And of course, the character Taka, played by Koyuki. So like the four of them together were in the promotional stuff in Japan. And something that kind of blew my mind as I was researching is that The Last Samurai is the 14th highest grossing movie of all time at the Japanese box office.
Yeah. It was a pretty popular film there.
It's still popular there.
Yeah.
And like Tom Cruise attracts huge crowds there because of that movie. I think that says something.
Are you sure he's not as popular because of Vanilla Sky? I mean,
funny thing, the cinematographer from this worked with Tom on that movie.
He's like, I know how to shoot your deformed face. Have you seen Vanilla Sky?
Like so long ago.
It's a fucking trip, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's the sequel to this one, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it should be. It's so funny. So Cruise is like in the middle in this movie. He's in the middle of like dark cruise period, which I find interesting. So it coincides, not coincidentally, with when I and you were the same age, got really into films. But I do find like the Cruise that we knew was like kind of like darker than he was in the early 90s and 80s. So, okay. Magnolia gets nominated for a supporting actor role. He's a total dick in that movie, if I remember correctly. I don't have the patience to rewatch that film, but I might someday. Then he does Mission Impossible 2, which is like, well, he was always going to do that. Fine. He does Vanilla Sky, which is a pretty obtuse and dark film for Tom Cruise. And like with Cameron Diaz and Cameron Crowe, it's very strange. He does Minority Report, which is pretty dark. The Last Samurai. Collateral, my favorite Tom Cruise film.
That's a great movie.
And then he does War of the Worlds. And then after that, it's kind of like he's like, I am done with this. And I'm going to go do Mission Impossible 3, which is what he does next.
Hearing you list those movies that came out in just like bangers after one another, I do sort of think like, I think this is the movie, as in Last Samurai might have been what started him on this whole like do my own stunts thing.
I don't know if it started him, but he does a lot of his own stunts in this.
It's crazy.
The one that Zwick points out in the commentary is when he's gets in that first sword fight, and he was like, we shot this for like 3 days. Cruise would get his ass kicked the whole time, and then he would come up and he'd be like, hey, did we get it? And I would be like, Zwick was like, I would tell him, I mean, we got most of it. And Tom Cruise would be like, so we didn't get it. And then he would just go back and do it again. And it's just like, and they would do it for fucking forever. And he just got his ass kicked the entire time. It's pretty fucking amazing what he does in this film, even though it's like, understandably, he's not jumping off a cliff on a motorbike and pulling a parachute like he does in Mission Impossible.
But they are using, I know they're blunted practice swords, but if one of those hit you in the face, you chip a tooth for sure.
Yeah.
You know,
like, the one later where he draws the Swordmaster in combat, where they're practicing, like he said, Zwick was like, they're really going that fast. Yeah. And when they stop right at each other's faces, like they're really doing it. And he was like, it's really what he was like. I was really worried because if Tom Cruise gets hit in the face and he breaks something or he gets a scar, that's a whole other pile of work, or like we have to wait or something like that.
Yeah,
and
it's like so a week or two of waiting for his bruised nose to heal.
Yeah, and he's like, so the whole time he's like, my heart's in my throat watching Tom Cruise like get
I love that.
an inch from his face with this wooden sword. Yeah.
Before we get into plot, I also want to just talk a little bit about the Meiji era.
Tell me.
I'm a little bit of an amateur historian, as you know.
Yeah.
And for a while I was pretty obsessed with the Meiji era. I just think it's a really interesting time in Japanese history. And it was such a turning point for like the relations between countries in the Pacific and stuff.
Yeah. And America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the movie sort of portrays it. It really simplifies it, but it's not a bad sort of overview of what sort of happened. But really what happened is that the Americans sent warships to bully Japan into buying shit from them.
That doesn't sound like America at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah, it's so strange. Yeah, weird.
It was actually the French who were hired to train the Japanese army, not Americans.
Right. Yeah. Tom Cruise's character is based on 2 French soldiers. Very like loosely, but yeah.
The weapons were actually bought mostly from the Portuguese.
Yeah, Portuguese were bigger there. I've seen Silence.
Yeah.
They're all like, oh, let us be Christian and torture us.
Yeah.
I will never.
And
confess.
there was that there was the Japanese Christian rebellion, which was very brutally suppressed.
Yeah. That's what Silence is about. That's a fucking great movie.
Oh, yeah.
It's my other favorite.
It's the prequel to this movie.
Technically, yes. Yeah. Technically, Silence is the prequel. And really, Pearl Harbor is the sequel, So.
And it doesn't happen, 70 years later or something like that, technically speaking, because this movie ends in 1877. Or something.
I thought it was 1900 or something.
I'm pretty sure it ends in 1877.
Oh, okay. So, something that Zwick talks about. He was like, yeah, one thing they wanted to do, especially with the ending, with the Meiji Emperor being like, they reject the treaty and stuff and send the Americans away. He was like, I wanted to make it so that we establish that the timeline of U.S.-Japan relations has been going on for a long time. It wasn't just like they were over there and then they bombed us. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't help thinking about Pearl Harbor because that's kind of how it seems. It's just like Josh Hartnett and Ben Affleck are trying to fuck Kate Beckinsale in Pearl Harbor. And then all of a sudden these like total strangers come and bomb them. And they're just like, why would the Japanese want to do this? And it's like, well, no, there was a huge
There's a lot of reasons.
Yeah. I mean, making that movie was the reason they did it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
They were like, in the future, you will make a terrible movie. And Michael Bay was like, I won't let the Japanese from the 40s bully me into not making this feature film.
Oh, frig. Friggin' shit.
Friggin' Bay. Yeah. So I like, and to be fair, this movie, I saw it when I was a teenager. I didn't know that. I wouldn't have fucking known that shit at all. That Americans and Japanese.
Actually, I'm pretty sure this movie is what sent me down the rabbit hole of like, holy shit, this is so interesting. I need to know more.
I mean, it's probably a movie that sent a lot of people down like a Japanophile kind of zone,
But it is really interesting to me that this movie was so popular in Japan.
Yeah.
Like, that's really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That it was really well received there. I think that speaks volumes.
Do you think a movie like this would like go over well today? I don't think that it would. That's
I don't know. It's such it's such a tough thing to like. I mean, for one thing, I don't think the creative team attached would have been the creative team attached.
No.
I don't know. That's a tough question. I just don't think people are making epics like this. It's really out of fashion, which is really sad because I really fucking love this shit.
Yeah, like the historical epic is, I mean, what's a recent historical epic?
I guess
really?
like The King?
Maybe, but like they...
Well, that's more based on a Shakespeare play.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really an epic.
And those movies are like for... price-wise, they're not epics.
Yeah.
Like this movie...
And they're shot for being watched on a TV at home.
Yeah.
As opposed to this one, which is so clearly like spectacle, beautiful rolling country. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you can kind of tell that they were trying to compete with movies like, Lord of the Rings and Master
Definitely
and Commander.
Influence.
Like,
yeah.
it's in that same world. It's, yeah.
Whenever I think of that time, the early 2000s, which kind of sort of ends like just before 2010 with these types of movies, was that like Braveheart was like the proto historical epic.
Yeah.
But because, to be honest, like Braveheart is kind of not that good in my opinion. And then Gladiator came along, and whatever you think of Gladiator, it's like, this is the bomb. Yeah. This is the shit. And then it birthed like Gladiator and Lord of the Rings kind of like fused to birth this time where they were like big star, historical epic, Last Samurai, Master and Commander, things like that. And
Kingdom of Heaven, like
Kingdom of Heaven, and even I would say
Braveheart walked so those movies could run.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's kind of the progression there.
And then I would even say stuff like, and then you kind of like get prestige versions of that, like There Will Be Blood is a little bit like that. Like you're just like huge star, but this is like on an Oscar baity historical epic kind of thing. I don't know. It's interesting, but then I think that fell off because I think what I imagine happened was they were like, man, these cost a lot and don't make enough money.
They do cost a lot. Yeah. I forgot to write down the actual cost of this production, but it was not a cheap movie.
But it's like under 200 million though.
Something like that.
Yeah, which is really expensive, but I would guess it's somewhere like 125 maybe, but it's like I think it's bigger than I would think. I think today they would try to make it for like $60 million without
Probably.
Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Because they would have to get like one of the Chris's.
God, could you imagine this movie with Chris Pratt?
No, I can't.
I don't want to see it. I don't want to see that at all.
Chris Pratt just like his like kind of chubby rolls like coming out of the samurai uniform, just being like, "It's me, a samurai."
You mean
Yeah.
Pre-Guardians of the Galaxy, Chris
Yeah.
Pratt.
Yeah, but he kept that big head, you know.
Yeah, he sure did. Oh,
Get
God.
that big head and those good hometown Christian values.
That's so funny.
Okay, before we get to the plot,
Yeah.
one more thing. One thing I really love about this movie, which I did not notice until recently, kind of rewatching it, and I've seen this movie many times, is the way that Tom Cruise's character, as a war criminal, as we said earlier, he was part of this thing that became like an American legend, like the Custer thing.
Yeah.
But it's all based on like a lie, which I find, and that's kind of what drives him to be so messed up and alcoholic about it.
Yeah.
And then he gets a chance to like become part of a true myth in a way. And I think
Well,
that's like
an interesting take
yeah,
on that.
I think that's what interests me so much about the story, is that he's struggling against this idea that he's like being celebrated for something awful, that people are like, yeah, but you did a great thing and drove the Indians out of the South or whatever.
Right.
And it's like, no, that was all like just a horrible massacre. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't like a valiant thing. And then when Custer dies at Little Bighorn, like he says, he's like, he fell in love with his own legend
Yeah.
and thought that he could do this thing, and he just couldn't. I find that aspect of the story like really fascinating to me.
It's also really interesting when you look at like the role of the samurai in a changing culture.
Yeah.
Because like essentially Japan was locked in time in a feudal system and a caste system where the samurai were like above other people.
Yeah.
In between the lords and then the peasants.
They were like the landowners kind of,
Yeah.
who like
It was,
yeah.
I mean, this is a gross oversimplification, but like knights in medieval Europe is all like you could like chivalry and Bushido have like some correlations there. There's some similarities. So it's like interesting the way this movie does choose to depict this. It does oversimplify it, but the samurai were like, it was a split thing. Like some samurai were for the Reformation and were for giving up their status, and others
the general,
exactly
the one who kills himself after the battle. Yeah.
Oh man, that guy's mustache.
Oh, killer.
Wow.
Yeah.
And such a great little character. Like he's only in it for like 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but wow.
Doesn't say a word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to.
Nope.
Anyway, it's interesting that like, cause the culture itself was very divided
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very tumultuous time. I think it's really cool that they do depict that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and the way that like Tom Cruise notices and then we kind of notice later as the viewers is the way he's like, Katsumoto believes his rebellion is in service of the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's an interesting movie because you're like, he's hiding in this village and they try to kill him, but then he just goes to Tokyo and goes to the person who is ostensibly trying to end the rebellion.
Yeah.
And he's like, I still serve you and I'm still a politician. And I found that part, the way that he's like, he honors himself by being like, if you think I should die, you can just tell me.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, I'm like honoring the people of Japan by taking part in this rebellion. I just think that's really cool.
It
and
is.
also, I think for Algren, the thing that like affects him, unlike Tony Goldwyn, who plays this commander, he's like, they do the war and the fighting and the killing, which is horrible, and they admit that it's like it's awful to kill people, but he's like, they do it for a purpose that's greater than just themselves, unlike General Custer.
Right.
And that's what draws him to, put on a kimono and be like, I would rather do this, which in this movie, it's like, I don't blame you, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's that whole part of it is fascinating.
Yeah.
And the big crux of the plot is that this young man who's obviously overwhelmed with different opinions and like has a huge decision to make that's going to affect his whole population, right? And he's just like, he can't make a decision.
Yeah.
He's just so frozen.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting hook.
Yeah.
That like we're just kind of waiting for this guy to say something.
The emperor, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that his like the Emperor's inaction causes people to think that they can manipulate him.
Yeah, exactly.
And the interesting, like, I find that scene where Katsumoto goes to visit him, he's like, you're literally a god, so why don't you tell me what to do?
Totally.
And the Emperor is like, well, if I'm a god, why don't I know what to do?
Yeah.
Which I thought was like really cool. The Emperor obviously knows he's just a guy.
Yeah.
He's like coming to terms with his fallibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that performer, by the way, he's like a famous kabuki performer, or his dad
really?
was a famous kabuki performer.
That's
and
cool.
He is a kabuki performer. But that's also where he gets that kind of like stilted performance, which Zwick was looking for this guy. And
Very
then also
cool.
he was like, he also just looked a lot like the Emperor did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that actor, I'm afraid I don't remember his name, and I
Mhm.
didn't write it down. But man, what an ethereal performance.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he was good. Because he's only really in 2 scenes, kind
Yeah.
of. And he only speaks like he has like 3 lines, kind of.
I love that scene. Maybe we should wait to talk about it for when the plot gets going.
Yeah, let's talk about the plot.
Let's do it.
When I watched this, I watched this movie 3 times in prep for this. And when I watched it the first time, it opens with this little montage with Timothy Spall giving this voiceover. I don't like that. I don't like it very much. But when I learned later from the commentary what it meant, I was like, okay, I still don't like it, but I understand what it's there for. And what's important is that it shows that white tiger, the flag thing, right? And it shows Katsumoto meditating, and what he's seeing is this prophecy. That's kind of what he believes he's seeing. And later, when Tom Cruise is almost getting captured at the battle, he's waving a spear with that white tiger flag on it. And Katsumoto, that's why he
clocks it.
Yeah, he's like, is the prophecy that I think I'm about to see, is it going to come true? And that's why he doesn't stop. He stops him from killing him.
Yeah.
Is because he
knows
kills
this is important somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool.
I also want to add on, the white tiger in Japan is a massive celestial being that makes up several constellations, and it lives in the western sky.
Oh,
so it's known
interesting.
as the western white tiger.
Yeah.
So I just thought
cool.
that's a really interesting.
Yeah.
That was like me doing this deep dive because I was just like you rewatching it, and on the third time I was like, I mean, this image has to mean something more than just like the flag he had on the spear.
The thing is that they never talk about it again.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
Yeah, I like that too.
It's just that Katsumoto knew this was going to be important for some reason.
Yeah. And to be fair, Tom Cruise is the white tiger of our society.
Wow.
He's a big jungle cat.
He really is.
Well, he's a short jungle cat.
A short
You
king.
know what? Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So basically, like, Tom Cruise is this drunken has-been fucking captain who is shilling for the Winchester Rifle Company, and he's a real problem in San Francisco.
He's a loose cannon.
He's literally a loose cannon. And his buddy Billy Connolly thinks it's the most entertaining shit he's ever seen.
I love that this movie sets it up to be a buddy comedy about these two guys.
Billy Connolly gets so killed.
I'm not going to lie, it's one of my favorite Billy Connolly roles.
He's
too.
fantastic.
He's so fucking funny.
What does he say at the battle? He's like, "No offense, Captain, but you can fuck yourself."
He's like, Tom Cruise says something like, "You will remove yourself, Sergeant," and he's like, "No offense, Captain, but shove it up your arse." Yeah. It's so fucking good.
Dude.
And then he fucking dies right after
immediately.
that.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome. Billy Connolly comes to him with this job. He's like, "Hey, we can. You were really good at killing indigenous people. We got some more if you want." And he brings him to Omura and Tony Goldwyn. The guy who plays Omura is a film director, and he did not want to act at all. He was like, "I'm really uncomfortable with this."
He was great in that part.
And Zwick in the commentary was like, this is the first scene he did, and he was very uncomfortable on camera. And then later he's like, you can see, his name's Hanada, I believe? Masato Harada. And he was like, you can see later in the film how he gets like so much more comfortable on camera, and he gives like little flourishes and stuff. But he was like, yeah, this first scene, he was like, I hate this.
That's so. I would not have clocked that because I love his performance.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
The way he has this kind of like I don't want to sound like in a racial way, but this like Japanese snobbery about these Americans, right?
Yeah.
And like he says the one guy, he's like, oh, these people are like so uncivilized.
Yeah.
But he also has this like European aristocracy put on thing that he's obviously learned from others.
And he's like adopted.
And you see like in his office and stuff, it's like not Japanese, it's very European.
Yeah.
And it's such an interesting like clash of these two types of influences in that character.
And like I love that it's so clear that he really believes that this is the way forward for Japan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like maybe he's lining his pockets. It's sort of insinuated.
He is Mr. Burns, basically. Yeah. Like he is like the Japanese Mr. Burns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Cruise accepts essentially because they get paid like a ton of money, a metric ton of money to go to Japan and train this army. There's a fantastic moment after this dinner when Tom Cruise leaves the table and Tony Goldwyn goes after him and he's like, I'll kill anybody for money, but I would gladly kill you for free. And that's like a great moment.
It's an
You're
awesome
like,
moment.
Yeah, dude. So off he goes to Japan, goes to train the army to put down this rebellion of samurai who are all, as they say, savages. They don't even have firearms. They fight with swords and spears and bows and arrows. In Japan, he meets Timothy Spall, who's like a amateur anthropologist kind of and a photographer.
Yeah.
I love his character in this kind of, and I love the way he pops up.
I think it's great. He's sort of like the accidental narrator.
Yeah.
In a way.
He's a bit of like the audience.
Yeah.
Kind of. He's like that weird like stand-in for the audience in a way, and he's almost entirely there to help reveal Nathan Algren's character and like prod him because he's such a goof, like the one part where he asks about the scalping and you're just like,
I love that.
You shouldn't
whole
talk
sequence.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that when he's like, I've always just had a dread fascination.
Yeah.
Never understood the technique. Like,
yeah.
Oh, and
Dude.
the look in Tom Cruise's eyes is so great in that
I know.
part.
Yeah. Also, something I didn't notice was like in that scene, Billy Connolly is like, Tom Cruise can speak.
Oh, he calls it Blackfoot.
Yeah, he can speak the language of this
Yeah.
tribe, and the guy's like, "Oh, you're a linguist and stuff," and they were talking about it. But later, it makes sense because when he learns Japanese very quickly, it's like, "Oh yeah,
Totally.
he's pretty good at this.
He's done this before,
and he's just surrounded by them all the time." Yeah, which I thought was a cool detail. They they train the troops. There's a part where they're gonna go attack, but Tom Cruise is like, "They're not ready. Have this guy shoot me," and the guy can't shoot him.
I love that moment.
It's a fantastic moment. Yeah. The part where he like whispers like, "Just shoot me." It's like pretty fucking great.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise is really good in this.
He's great. It's so intense.
He's a good actor. I think.
He's got a promising career ahead.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think we'll be hearing about him for a couple years from now. Yeah.
I really love that moment because it really drives home this insane suicidal nature he's like been developing.
Yeah.
It's almost like in that moment he's like, you know what? If he shoots me, I win. If
Yeah.
he doesn't shoot me, then all these guys don't die.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win for him.
Yeah.
And boy, does it set up his like this the next scene, the first big battle.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, it's like, you know, the idea of in writing of like the refusal of the call.
Yeah.
Like it's not quite, but like kind of this like call to adventure where it's like, we're going to go off and fight the samurai now. And he's like, no. He kind of refuses it. And he's like, no, so badly, I want you to shoot me.
Yeah.
And then someone else is like, well, too bad. We're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So they go off to this battle and it's crazy. Billy Connolly gets stabbed hardcore.
Yeah.
And Tom Cruise is kidnapped. Now this battle scene, I couldn't quite gather what Zwick was talking about, but the part where the samurai charge through the woods and there's like the fog and the smoke and the mist and stuff, which is crazy, like really good shot. He was like,
beautiful.
He said that took 2 weeks to get right.
Wow.
Now I'm sure that doesn't mean they were like filming it for 2 weeks, but he was like, we constantly had to fiddle with like the camera to get the effect we were looking for. I think he also said that was on a set.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I was trying to figure out where that was shot.
Yeah, I think it was on a set.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was a soundstage.
Yeah.
The other option is maybe it was part of the like 3 weeks they did in Hawaii.
Oh, they did? I didn't know that.
A little bit.
Okay, interesting.
Or maybe it was 2 weeks. I should have written all this down. Anyway, because that kind of tree does grow in Hawaii.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because he mentioned he was like, we just every time we shot this thing, we just couldn't get it right, and we had to
Interesting.
keep doing it. And it took collectively like 2 weeks to do it. I was
Wow.
like, that's the effect is amazing. That scene and the Hans Zimmer like score in that scene is like really, really thrilling and fucking cool.
And like when you can hear their war horns through the fog just before they emerge. Oh, it's phenomenal.
And the way that like I love the way that you can see the one guy has like antlers on his helmet, and you can see them coming through the fog. It's like
it's horrifying.
fucking,
it's super scary. Like I do not blame those troopers for shitting their pants.
Dude.
I would too.
And then also what's cool about this is like Edward Zwick is very obsessed with how dangerous the stunts were with like a lot of the horses and stuff.
Oh,
and there's
bet.
parts in the commentary. There's parts in the commentary where he's like, yeah, so okay, that's Tom. He's on a real horse there. All right, he's on an animatronic horse on that shot. And then this one's a puppet on the ground. There's like so he's like on just 3 different types of horses.
Holy moly.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing because he was
Wow.
like, it's just impossible to shoot a real horse for all of these things, and it's like super dangerous. And yeah, a lot of the stunts they did were like pretty visceral and intense. And while they don't like this was kind of like the best era of like stuntmen doing most of this stuff instead of like CG crowds doing everything.
Totally.
Which is safer, certainly. But
sure, but I mean, there's something to literally like dozens of people hitting one another with stuff. Like it just looks better. It just does.
Yeah, for
sure. And like the way it culminates with like Nathan is the last person, literally the last man standing.
He's the last samurai.
Oh, that's what this movie. Got it.
The movie ends right after this.
But like that moment when he's just like fighting them off and taking little cuts, and like he would slowly, he would die, but he's just like, nope, I'm just gonna fight to the very, very end.
Which is really interesting because like it goes against what you would think, because clearly he does want to live, even though only moments ago he wanted to die.
Yeah.
And it's like you can see that there's something to live for inside of him. I think that's kind of what Katsumoto sees when he approaches.
And I think he also sees like he's inspired by like what he sees as like a samurai spirit, someone who like who would rather die fighting than give up.
Then surrender.
Yeah.
The ferocity of the way he fights back, even though he's clearly beaten.
Yeah. And
then even at the last moment when the guy approaches him and he still kills him.
That moment is so great.
Yeah. That's like the moment I think when Katsumoto is like, this is the white tiger.
Yeah.
El Tigro Whito.
That's Japanese for white tiger.
Japanese. I learned a little. I dabble in my Japanese. So they capture Tom Cruise. They take him to the village. Our favorite scene commences.
And actually, so I have something for that, and I might be completely wrong, but sake in Japanese doesn't just mean that beverage. It's just the term for alcohol.
Oh, perfect. Well, it makes sense.
So he's just screaming into the night for just give me some fucking booze.
To be fair, he's an alcoholic.
Yeah. So. I mean, it's funny, having seen it now 3 times in a week, I was like rewatching that scene last night. I was just like, I mean, he's probably having like not just alcohol withdrawal, which is horrendous. He's also
probably got a couple bruises.
Like, he's been stabbed like 3 times. His fever is probably through the roof. He just had to ride in that condition through mountains.
Yeah.
That guy is battered.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
And I do like the Japanese, the samurai medical system are just like, just leave him alone.
Yeah.
Wait for him to get better. Yeah.
I love that moment where Taka is just like, no, we're not going to give him booze.
Yeah. My favorite, as we texted each other back and forth a lot about the sake screaming part, but when he's like, he does the one where he's like, sake!
Yeah.
And then he's like, sake! Just like my favorite
he's just
little
giving
moment.
It the most for sure.
It's just got that like Tom Cruise, like, it's like, yeah, he gives 110% in every little thing.
Oh yeah.
It's my favorite.
And
that's
fantastic.
He kind of comes out of his stupor and realizes like he's in this Japanese village. He's not only that, he's in the house of the man that he killed.
Yeah.
Which
also a note I wrote down was that Taka literally has to sit there and listen to him go through this withdrawal because he's just, he's in his own room, but like, the walls are made of rice paper. Like everyone in the village is just listening to him shriek and scream for like what seems like a week or something.
Yeah,
like,
no wonder they find Americans annoying.
Yeah, no kidding. No wonder Bob is so annoyed that he's been stationed there to guard this fucking lady.
Like Bob, he's like, oh man, I wonder what my next samurai job is. Like, it's to watch the most annoying guy around.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck. It's like, oh god damn it.
Oh, it's so great.
Bob, underrated role in this. He's great.
Yeah.
So what's the actress's name? Koyuki?
Koyuki. Yeah.
Koyuki.
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 Yeah.
She's really good, and she is the wife of the man that Tom Cruise killed. And she has 2 little sons as well who are adorable. And Tom Cruise finally kind of emerges, and they're like, eat your white rice. Hang out with this guy who is Katsumoto's son.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the brother and stuff like that. And then he's basically just like allowed to wander the village. He's watched over by an elder samurai named Bob. That actor was considering retiring. And he told Edward Zwick that in most movies, he never got a named role. He was just part of a crowd of Japanese warriors most of the time. And Zwick was like, well, you got a great face and you don't really have to say anything, so you can be this role. And so he took it, and he's excellent.
Honestly, that moment where like Bob sort of is taking him to meet with Katsumoto, and they're walking up that huge hill, and Tom Cruise is like struggling and kind of breathing heavy, and Bob just like nudges him with the sword, come on, it's just over here. Yeah. Like he says that, but like with just a look, and he's just like gutting it, just so fit. I know. I love that part.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, I love Tom Cruise's little like digs at him when he's like, "Do you mind if I call you Bob?"
Yeah,
I guess I'll call you Bob. He's like, you know what I think you're upset, Bob? They make you wear a dress.
Yes. He's just like walking around this village, just talking to himself at this man. It's so great.
Tom Cruise is so funny, man.
He can
really turn it on.
He's actually really funny in that whole sequence. Yeah. It's great.
And then he talks to Katsumoto, who wants to speak in English to him. This was Ken Watanabe, like one of his first real English speaking roles. He said in that same article, I believe, the Guardian one we referenced, he was like, it took a while to get used to speaking in English, but all acting in whatever language you're doing, it's just all the same. So he was like, after I got used to it, it was fine.
And he's fantastic. Like that moment where he's like, even among enemies, it is considered extremely rude not to introduce yourself, is like such a great moment. And you see this change in Tom Cruise. Like he plays that part great where he's like, he almost has this moment of like, oh, I see what's happening here.
Also, like the part where Katsumoto, the one line where he's like, your people don't like conversation.
Yes. So people in your country don't like conversation.
Yeah.
It's so great.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. That clashing of like not just individuals but cultures is so fascinating.
I think like something that Tom Cruise kind of mentions it in his like journal in this movie, but like the way that the samurai, everything is like a serious pursuit in a way, even conversation.
Yeah.
Like it has like everything is meant to have a purpose, which I think is Cruise's journey in this movie.
It's finding purpose, finding intentionality.
Like, yeah, but also something that Zwick noted that I thought was really interesting was like they have this conversation and Katsumoto's like, you can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So you can wander around, but you can't go anywhere. You can't escape. There's not really any point in like, you're not even really a prisoner, but there's no point in trying to escape. And that is like the first time Tom Cruise's character is forced to sit still for a prolonged period of time. Otherwise, he's just been a nomad, going around doing what he does best, which is massacring indigenous peoples of different, areas of the world. And this is the first time he's ever had to be like, well, you're stuck here, so get used to it. And so he starts to learn this, like, there's value in that kind of stillness and then the serious pursuit of whatever it is, even if it's warfare, which is like what he's like, well, I'm good at that with a gun. Maybe I could be good at it with a sword.
Yeah.
Because, he starts to learn kind of swordsmanship and meditation and stillness, talks a lot with Katsumoto, gets the shit kicked out of him by the sword master a couple times.
Oh, man, that scene where he, like, see it's like raining. It's the classic,
Fantastic. Yeah.
And he like sees the two kids practicing with training swords, and he just goes over to be like, "Wow, you kids are really impressive." And for some reason, Katsumoto's son is like, "Oh yeah, you should try as well."
Yeah.
And then immediately, fucking Ujio comes around the corner, and he's just like, "What are you doing with that child?"
Yeah.
And then
like,
he
I'll
kicks
show
his
you.
ass.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's
so
one of my
brutal.
favorite scenes in the movie. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite aspects of the movie, which I still think about like all the time in my adult life, is when Cruz is sparring with the big dude.
Oh,
I think,
yeah.
and he gets his ass handed to him a couple times, and then the guy, Katsumoto's son, he's like too many mind. That's what he said. He doesn't speak English, so he's like, too many mind. He's like, mind the people, mind the fight, mind everything. He's like, too many mind, no mind. Yeah. I think of that all the time. I think that's one of like the greatest.
It's
like
fantastic.
One line advice parts of any film I've ever seen.
That shit has stuck with me too.
Yeah, I think it's really great.
I just love the look on Cruz's face after that, where he's like, no mind.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then I love to, right after that, he like takes the big guy down, and then he's like, great. And then the big guy immediately gets him in like a leg
so
hold.
good. It's
awesome.
fantastic.
And also there's a short scene where he tries to teach the kids baseball, and they all chase him. It's adorable.
Chase the ball.
Yeah.
Chase the ball.
Yeah, it's really adorable. And so this is all done like in montage. You hear Nathan Algren's like journal stuff over it, and he talks about blah blah blah. You know, he starts to assimilate to the samurai way as like in an anthropological way. He learns Japanese, starts to be able to communicate, becomes a little more positive, gets sober.
Yep.
Starts the 12 steps. Yeah. There's a scene where the village is attacked by these ninja-like figures.
I want to just touch on, in that scene when they're doing the stage play.
Yeah.
There's that moment, and it makes my heart start beating so fast every time when Algren looks up for a moment, just like the warrior instinct, something like the hair is on the back of his neck, and he just sees like that shoulder disappear behind the.
Oh, it's great.
It's
great too because he's looking at Koyuki.
Yeah,
and like he's like looking at her and smiling, and then he just casually glances up like he would, and he sees his thing. Also, Katsumoto, he's fucking. Watanabe is so good in that little stage play thing. It's so fucking awesome.
He's hilarious.
Yeah. So then there's like a very intense fight scene, and essentially Watanabe is Katsumoto is like, we got to go to Japan, to Tokyo, excuse me, or Kyoto. I don't know which one. To
the capital.
Kind of figure this all out because spring is now here and we can ride our horses there, and you can go free to Algren even though he clearly doesn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
They go to the capital. Algren returns to the army, even though he's pretty much like, I don't want to be here. And
very clearly.
Katsumoto goes to the emperor, talks to the emperor, and then they pass these laws against the samurai. And he goes to the council with the swords, and then they say, like, the law forbids you from carrying the weapons. And he's like, then arrest me.
Yeah.
And so they arrest him, basically. And Tom Cruise is, like, getting ready to leave just forever. He's like, fuck this. And then he kind of senses that Katsumoto, he's like, no, I should help. Whatever's happening, I should help. So he goes to find Katsumoto and rescues him.
In an incredibly funny scene.
With
Spall.
Spall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With Spall, where
when he says he's the president.
Don't you recognize him? This is the American president.
Yeah.
And Tom Cruise is, again, he's funniest when he doesn't have to say much.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
The little look he gives, I'm like, oh, yeah. And then he like shoulders him forward.
Yeah.
Come on, get that equipment in there. It's so funny.
Also,
it's so funny.
Timothy Spall, when he's like, I think I've made a mistake.
So good.
And so they rescue Katsumoto, and Katsumoto's son is killed in the preceding rescue attempt. It's a good scene, good action scene. They go
brutal.
Back to the village, and they're like, I mean, they're going to come after us, so we might as well defend ourselves. And there's the classic historical scene where they prepare for the final battle by doing a bunch of stuff. You're like, what's going to happen with that big giant ball of sticks?
I wonder what that's going to be. With tar poured on it. What's that going to do?
Interesting. These samurai.
Wow.
They know what's up. Yeah. And then there's like this final battle sequence, essentially. And
there is the slightly awkward. It's like the only part of the movie that to me feels a little forced, where Taka like puts him in the armor of her dead husband.
Yeah,
it's like
the kiss is too far,
way too far,
one step too far.
I'm afraid that's the only part that I don't really buy, because like her arc is like, fine, this man who killed my husband seems all right.
That's
you know
okay.
What I mean?
But
and
I think the stakes needed to be a little higher,
I suppose.
Yeah. But it's funny, Zwick mentions that. He was like, we debated a lot about whether they should kiss at all.
Right.
And he was like, what we settled on was that it would be a very...
It's like almost chaste.
Yeah, it would be a very held back kiss. It wouldn't be like a passionate explosion of love, kind of. I agree with that, but I do kind of think it's like too far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then he's given the sword.
And the armor.
And the armor, and... Katsumoto gives him like the newly forged blade, the one that has the inscription on it.
Yeah, it says he's the rightful king of Gondor.
That's exactly right. The beacons are fucking lit.
Yeah.
The like, I belong to the warrior in whom the older ways have joined the new.
Yeah.
Really
pretty cool.
That's pretty dope.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
And then they have the parlay in the final battle. I really like that scene.
Yeah.
Where he's like, Tony Goldwyn calls him a savage, essentially. He's like, I'll look for you. It's like, okay. Good.
Oh, it's wild.
And I love the little moment when Katsumoto comes back. He's like, well, they won't surrender.
It's so great. And then in that, like, the reaction shot, you just see Bob like shake his head and draw his sword.
Yeah.
This bad motherfucker.
Yeah, dude. He's amazing.
Yeah.
And then there's an insanely chaotic battle that it's very long. Like
it's almost a half hour.
Yeah, it's a very this movie's over 2 hours long. It's like 2:20, and to be honest, it doesn't quite feel like it.
No,
but
it rolls along at a very pleasing pace. Like it's very there's not a lot of wasted time.
It's very
at
well
all.
paced.
Totally.
I will say though,
well
maybe
edited.
it's just because I've seen it so many times. Like the final battle is very long and just not quite as visually compelling to be as long as it is, but it's good.
Yeah.
And the end of it is like worth it all, because the ending of it is like amazing.
It's so affecting. Like every time my eyes well up. Oh, no matter what.
Okay, so there's this crazy final battle. Then the remaining samurai like charge against this like suicide charge against these Gatling guns.
Yeah.
They're just getting like mowed down to pieces. Tom Cruise kills Tony Goldwyn, which is what you want.
Yep.
They're just getting like shot to pieces essentially. And there's the Imperial captain who was in the earlier battle and this battle. I could not find that actor's name. He is fucking awesome.
Incredible.
And he starts to cry. And that moment gets me every time.
Totally.
I'm like, this is like that's the best moment of the film.
When he takes his hat off and he kneels.
Yeah, but just like the way his tears, he starts to cry as the guns are firing, and then he gets them to cease fire and stuff. And it's just like, it's such a fucking insanely beautiful moment. And like I really like that.
And I love how for Katsumoto's like his last little bit there earlier in the movie, like one of the exchanges with him and Tom Cruise is about cherry blossoms.
Poetry.
And how he's always looking for the perfect cherry blossom.
Yeah.
Then at the end, just his last line being, "Oh, they're all perfect." Fuck off, man. I'm going to start crying right now.
Yeah, dude.
It's fantastic.
Great. Yeah. And there's a thing that I noticed is like he's working on a poem as one of these like things, like one of these recurring things that they talk about. And he's like, I'm having trouble with the last line. And I always think of that moment. I'm like, he's like, he found the last line of his poem.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's so good.
Yeah. It's great.
It's almost like this movie's pretty darn good.
He fully deserved an Academy. He was so fucking good in this movie.
Yeah,
and
man.
Yeah, like, although I also think Watanabe deserved an Academy Award for Inception too, so I'm kind of biased.
Great in that
I think
movie.
He's fantastic.
I'd give the man an award for fuck's sake. Come on.
Have you seen Tokyo Vice?
Yeah.
Oh man, it's fucking great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then so Katsumoto, Cruise, Omura at that last battle wants to like kill Katsumoto dishonorably, basically, and Cruise helps him kill himself, which is the honorable death because he's been defeated in battle. Cruise also gets a couple bullet holes in him, but he shows up at the signing of the treaty between the Emperor and the very American mutton choppy guy.
The most American.
This is an outrage.
Yeah.
This
is an outrage.
This will be the greatest treaty between Japan and America.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah. This is outrageous that you wouldn't accept my very good treaty. Yeah. And he presents him Katsumoto's sword, and the Emperor rejects the treaty. And then Timothy Spall gives a little coda, and he says no one knows what happened to him. Some say he died, some say he sake. But we see him return to the village, and off in the distance is Kyoki.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And fade to black on Tom Cruise's face,
That's right.
which what every movie with him should do.
It's true. I'm pretty sure it is. Must be in the contract.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
They cut a scene where he did a backflip down that hill because he was like, this is how I want to end it. And a motorcycle down and swept her up into his arms.
I do like that it bookends it with that narration.
Yeah. I like that too.
Yeah, it's lovely.
The movie also does a good job of like giving Timothy Spall a place in this. And I love kind of like historical exploration movies a little bit, which this isn't quite that, but it has enough of that like anthropological lens that Spall gives and Tom Cruise gives when he's writing in his journal. I really like that style of film, so this hints at it just a little bit.
It just sort of occurred to me that like Tom Cruise's character in this movie is literally struggling with white guilt.
Oh yeah.
Like the whole that's
time.
like that's what his thing is.
Yeah.
And it's not that he's like absolved, it's that I feel like maybe he takes enough punishment and then finds meaning in a completely different culture because he wants to he's rejected his own.
I don't think the movie is asking this of the viewer, but the idea of like the movie asking you to absolve Tom Cruise of the crimes he committed as in the Americas is like a little too much. Although it does give you a little bit of like the benefit of the doubt because there is flashbacks of him telling Tony Goldwyn, who is literally a war criminal, like to not do this thing. But at the end, like Tom Cruise did take part in this massacre of indigenous people in America, right? But I don't think the movie is really asking that, but also
I don't think it is either.
Yeah.
That's not really what it's about.
Yeah, but also are people not allowed to feel regret and find some sort of their own personal absolution? Like I think that's kind of what the movie's about, even if it's complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. It's complicated is kind of
I think ending,
one of the things I love about the movie is that it does live in the gray area.
A little, yeah.
Like it's things aren't like sure, it's about like the modern and the old, but like as like the sword says, like sometimes these things can coexist and blend together. It's just it asks some interesting stuff. It does.
I think also there's a part where Zwick notes and that I have always noticed that is like a choice that I really love in the final battle when the samurai charge at the Gatling guns and there's there's a little bit of tension there because you're just like, oh shit, are they gonna charge these guys, or are the guys gonna get the ammo in the Gatling guns and fire on them? Like it's a very great moment of tension being built. And as soon as they fire, the music cuts. Yeah. And it's like, it reminds me a lot of the very beginning of Saving Private Ryan when the ramp drops and it's just like sound and just the most obscene violence happening like all in with a moment. And in this movie, like the music cuts and Zwick says in the commentary, he's like, as soon as those guns fire, that is the modern era beginning in Japan and the end of the samurai. Basically. And I was like, it's like about the march of like history moving past these people.
It's so foreshadowed by the first scene we get with Cruise, where he's talking about the lever action of this new rifle that's gonna blow a hole the size of a donut in your daddy or whatever he says to that kid. Like it's the new thing. And there's always gonna be new things that come in and they're just made to kill lots of people.
The darkness of there's like this quote that he throws off, but like the darkness of the part where he's like, you can kill 30 Indians in a minute, or it's so chilling to think about, right? And then later you get these Gatling guns where it's like you can fire 100 rounds in a minute, and it's like, Jesus Christ.
And having it flipped around where he's on the receiving end of it is really, really interesting.
The irony of that,
Yeah. As he himself says, he's beset by the ironies of his life.
Yes.
And he has no idea how real that shit is.
Oh, man. This is a good fucking movie, dude.
There's a lot of great like he even says, like like when they're talking about General Custer for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
and Watanabe says something like, yeah, sounds like a good general, or like, this sounds like a good death, or whatever he says. And Cruise is like, oh, maybe you can have one just like it one day.
Yeah.
Like, son of a bitch.
Yeah. The other thing, too, that line I said that I really like, where he's like, Custer fell in love with his own legend, is like the idea that Watanabe does get that and kind of like fulfills the legend that he's building, but he's realistic about it.
Yeah.
And he's not falling in love with his own legend. He's dying for something real.
Totally.
Kind of, and Cruise clearly admires that.
And it's like, I love that moment between them right before the battle, those two little beats where they're like talking about the 300 Greeks at Thermopylae.
Yeah.
And then, you know.
This is a sequel to 300, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I don't know why they fired Zack Snyder. But then that moment, like right before they charge, and Watanabe is like, so like what happened to those guys?
Yeah.
And Cruise is like, dead to the last man.
To the
and
last
then
man.
Watanabe smiles.
Yeah.
Love it. Like he knows.
Yeah.
I think that moment.
I was going to say, I think they fired Zack Snyder because this movie would be half an hour longer because all this action would be in slow-mo.
Oh, could you imagine the scene where he's like attacked by the Ronin in the street, directed by Snyder?
Yeah. God.
Also, that moment that's my personal favorite fight in
Yeah,
the whole
I think
in the whole picture.
It's cool.
It's incredible.
I like this stylistic choice of when he cuts the guy's head off and the sword goes like cleanly through, and like there's a moment which is very, I find those moments sometimes are like really unrealistic, but I kind of like the marriage of this stylistic samurai thing in this kind of like harsh American film. I think is really cool. Yeah.
There's some cool shit going on with this movie.
Yeah, it's imperfect, but it reminds me of like a bit of like a poor man's Gladiator. And like I think Gladiator does so many things. There's another dimension to Gladiator that I like a lot, and it does so many things so much better. But this movie is also kind of like, I don't know, it's not that far from being a great film.
Yeah, like I think I remember seeing it. Like I snuck into a theater to see this.
Hell yeah.
And I remember being like, oh, I got to read this book.
Because
I just assumed it was based on a novel.
Yeah.
And it's an original screenplay, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Really, really cool.
Yeah. It's The Last Samurai.
Shing.
Shing. Watch it. It's really good. You should
also,
watch it.
In case anyone's wondering, The Last Samurai, it isn't actually Tom Cruise. It's about Ken Watanabe being the last samurai.
Or it's plural.
Or
exactly. Plural.
That's another thing I hadn't even thought of.
Yeah. The vibe that I always got was that this movie got a little dismissed because of the preconceived notions about what it was about.
Totally.
But I was like, I don't know. Of all of those types of films which have undoubtedly like white savior narratives, I think this one goes about it very honestly and in a good,
I would agree.
in like a better way. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming here.
Thanks for having me.
We're speaking of Zack Snyder, we're gonna have you back.
Oh,
eventually,
yeah.
When I get around to watching Rebel Moon.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
We'll save that for that.
Save all your slow motion thoughts for Rebel Moon Part 1.
I'll think in slow motion.
Don't worry, because I think Rebel Moon Part 2 is coming out later this year, so we could probably do both of them. Because I know that as lazy as she is, couldn't even make it through 10 minutes of Rebel Moon Part 1.
I mean,
so
yeah.
And you watched it all.
I sure did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did break it up and go for a walk in the middle of it, though. I'm not going to lie.
Just to think about your life.
Yeah. My choices, my streaming choices.
I went to see Zone of Interest and I got out of it and you were like really excitedly texting me about Rebel Moon.
I had a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah. Good. We'll talk about it.
We will.
All right.
Lovely.
Thank you for listening. Thank you, Chris. We'll have you back. Goodbye.